I'm a huge fan of Russell Wilson. I like so many things about him. I like so much of what he represents. I think he's good for his team, obviously. He's good for the National Football League, and he's good for us as football fans. I truly believe that. I mean, kid's a great story. Here from Virginia, goes to NC State. After 3 years of playing there, NC State really doesn't want to keep him around. They'd rather go in the Mike Glennon direction, no matter what you may have been told otherwise. He goes on to Wisconsin, and he has that great year for the Badgers. And then he gets drafted in the third round of the 2012 draft by the Seattle Seahawks. Here's a kid, all 5'10" of him, that because of his size, most people said that he couldn't play in the National Football League and he couldn't be a big time starting quarterback. And a lot of people bashed the Seahawks for taking him in the third round of the 2012 draft. How ridiculous we all look now. And here's a guy that, in spite of all of those odds stacked against him, in spite of all the obstacles that he may have faced, is now one of the real stars of the National Football League. He's a quarterback of one of the league's marquee franchises right now. There's no question about that. He has become one of the real faces of the future of the National Football League. He has become that guy in many ways. Here's a guy that in 3 years, his team has went to the playoffs every year with him at the helm. Last year, they won the Super Bowl, and this year, they're back in the Super Bowl again, where he could possibly win back-to-back Super Bowls. Think about that. He would be the first quarterback in NFL history, the best of my knowledge, that would have 2 Super Bowl titles in his first 3 years. That's incredible. There's so much to like about this guy. He's reserved, he's humble, he's respectful. A lot of those things that we proclaim that we want our professional athletes to be like, Russell Wilson is like that. So I understand why a lot of fans gravitate towards him. I understand why the national sports media, and in particular the NFL media, gravitates towards him. And I understand why they want to elevate this guy. They should want to elevate this guy. He's good for the brand. He's good for the shield. He's good for all parties involved. I understand wanting to prop him up and feature him and spotlight him as so much of what is right with the National Football League when so many things this year have clearly been wrong. I get it and I understand it. However, the one thing I resent about the sports media, and in particular the NFL media, is the setting of a certain narrative. And that once that media has set that narrative in place, that is just to be accepted, and that's just the way it is. And if you ever go against that grain, you're kind of ostracized, or you're mocked, or you're ridiculed. And I see this whole narrative coming already, where you've got a lot of members in the national sports media, and that's growing by the day, that are going to sit there and advance this story that Russell Wilson is an elite NFL quarterback. And the more time passes along, the more you get mocked or ridiculed or questioned or confronted if you dare to challenge that way of thinking. The NFL and the media associated with the league, whether they want to admit it or not, frankly, sometimes whether they realize it or not, they have a certain agenda. They have an individual they are trying to get over, and they're going to do everything they can to get him over in the way that they want to get him over in order to advance a certain agenda. But as far as Russell Wilson being an elite quarterback, let's just pump the brakes here a little bit. Because we don't want to get to a situation where we're trying to force this fact down people's throats. We don't want to get to a situation where people start to resent a guy that doesn't deserve to be resented. We don't want to get to a point where we're trying to defend something when it doesn't really need to be defended. And I'm afraid that as more and more time goes along, that's exactly what's going to happen here. Look, to me, when you talk about an elite quarterback in the National Football League, that encompasses so many different things. A guy that's a leader, a winner, a champion, that has a sustained period of excellence for a period of time, a guy that has been at the top of his position, at the top of his game, at the top of his sport for a long period of time. You can't just sit there and have one great phenomenal year and all of a sudden be classified as elite at your position. No. Elite encompasses so many different things. And when I look at elite quarterbacks in the National Football League, I always look at that so-called Fantastic Four. And most people, I think, always accept this and agree with this. That in some order, it's Rodgers, it's Brady, it's Manning, Peyton that is, and Brees. Those are the four standard bearers of the quarterback position in the National Football League. Those are the four guys. That's that Fantastic Four. That's the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacking in today's NFL. They're all champions. They're all leaders. They're all winners. They've had sustained periods of excellence at the top of their sport. You can see the impact that they have on their teams. Sometimes it's easier to quantify than it is others. But when you see it, you understand it. You get it, even if you can't always explain it the best. You know that when you see Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, that you're seeing four guys that are a cut above the rest. When I look at Russell Wilson, I don't see that yet. And I don't understand how so many people believe that they can see that yet. I mean, I've seen people talk about Russell Wilson being a top 3, top 4, top 5 quarterback in the National Football League. And I'm like, the guy is a great player. And he's only going to get better as time goes along. And at some point in time, he probably is going to be one of the standard bearers of the position. He is going to be one of the standard bearers of the league. He is going to be an elite NFL quarterback. And if he goes on to win his second Super Bowl title on Sunday, that conversation is going to ramp up and in a big hurry. 2 Super Bowls in 3 years, man, that's incredible. But again, when we're talking about elite quarterbacks in the National Football League, you're really talking about that top 5, in my money. On my mind. And I've already mentioned the 4. And you could sit there and say, well, Brady didn't have the greatest statistical season, or Peyton Manning's noodle arm fell apart late in the year, or Drew Brees looks like he might be close to being done, what have you. Well, that may be the case to a degree. But they are still elite quarterbacks for a reason, for many of the reasons that I already eloquated earlier. We're talking about a guy in Russell Wilson that is as successful running with the football as he is throwing the football. And I understand that in today's National Football League and in the future going forward, that is going to become more and more important. And that's going to be more of a part of evaluating the quarterback position. I don't dispute that. And I don't disagree with that. However, at the end of the day, you are still a quarterback in the National Football League. You still have to be able to beat teams with your arm. And consistently, especially during the regular season the past couple of years, I've seen times where Russell Wilson has been nothing more than a mediocre pocket passer in the National Football League, and that is the truth. For this guy to be an elite quarterback, man, he sure has a lot of mediocre performances as a passer, and you could sit there and say, look at all the damage he does with his feet. Well, yeah, but if a team isn't really all that worried about him beating him with his feet, and as a result, they're able to contain him as a thrower, how much impact is he really having, or how much impact does that running with the football really have? Because if that was the case, then Michael Vick for years would have been an elite quarterback in Atlanta. He wasn't. Franchise quarterback, yes, but elite he was not. And there is a clear distinction between the two. A franchise quarterback is a guy that you build your team around. But a franchise quarterback you may or may not ever win a championship with. An elite quarterback is a guy that not only becomes the face of your franchise, but becomes the face of the league, and is that guy that is your leader, that is your everything, that you do everything around, and does eventually take you to the promised land. Those 4 guys that I mentioned, that Fantastic Four, they've all done that. They have that long track record of success. And now here comes Russell Wilson after 3 years where he's never had a season with 30 touchdown passes. He's never had a season where he's thrown for like 4,000 yards plus. He's never had a season where he's had completion percentage at 65. Now we're talking about him being an elite quarterback coming off of the heels of one of the worst statistical playoff performances I've seen from a big-name quarterback ever in the playoffs with what he did in the NFC Championship game against the Green Bay Packers. I'm sorry. That's not what an elite quarterback does. And the real truth of the matter is how many young quarterbacks put into that situation would have as much success, if not more success, than Russell Wilson statistically as a quarterback if they had Marshawn Lynch to hand the ball off to, and they had that great Legion of Boom defense on the other side to help bail his ass out. Russell Wilson is a good player. Russell Wilson is a very good player. Russell Wilson is going to get better. Russell Wilson, beyond question, is a franchise quarterback who is going to get paid like an elite quarterback this offseason. But I am sorry. You are not going to sit there and be able to convince me that he is the fifth best quarterback in the National Football League. Frankly, I don't even know if he's the best quarterback out of his draft class in 2012. That might be Andrew Luck of the Indianapolis Colts. Also, when we talk about elite players at that position, we're talking about guys with long, sustained excellence at the position. I would maybe say that a Tony Romo is better than a Russell Wilson. Mock it if you want to. I would say a Phillip Rivers would be better. I would say a Big Ben would be better, especially when you throw the championships into the mix. I hate this whole creative narrative that is structured because it fits the here and now, and it totally obscures the reality of the situation. And when I hear this talk about Russell Wilson and being an elite quarterback, and people saying that, a guy like Brady didn't have the greatest year, Brees didn't have the greatest year, Manning didn't finish the year off so strongly. Well, frankly, Russell Wilson didn't have that great of a year his damn self, and statistically doesn't measure up to those four guys. I mean, really. If Russell Wilson was an elite NFL quarterback, how come we don't hear any talk about him as an MVP candidate? If Russell Wilson was such an elite quarterback, we would know it. We would see it. We wouldn't have to have a narrative advance because it would be obvious for all of us to see. The fact that it is even up for debate or even up for discussion proves and further validates that he is not an elite NFL quarterback. Top 10 quarterback in the league, yes. Franchise quarterback, no question about it. Going to be one of the standard bearers of the position for the next decade. Going to be an elite quarterback. I don't think there's any question about that. But at this point in time, he's not an elite quarterback, and this narrative needs to stop. We need to always stop this knee-jerk reflex reaction to always go, in terms of the sports media, to the next big thing and diminish everything else that we've already accepted. No, we don't need to do that. Allow these things to happen naturally. Allow them to happen organically, because when they do, it leaves no doubt in anybody's mind what the truth actually is. You don't have to set the narrative with Russell Wilson. Let his play on the field set it, and eventually that reality will happen. I resent this whole agenda, though, from the NFL and their sports media that are trying to protect them, trying to advance this notion of Russell Wilson being an elite quarterback when that's just foolish. It is just completely foolish. He's going to get there, but he's not there yet. And you could talk about metrics, and you could talk about this statistical measure or that statistical measure. The only measure I need is my fucking eyeballs. I watch, and I see elite quarterbacks. And based off of that, I look at Russell Wilson, and I don't see that yet. So can we pump the brakes on this talk of him being an elite quarterback, please?